I've developed some frugal habits over the years that sort of came along with minimalism, and I thought I'd share them today in a video. Some of these things came naturally with minimalism, like buying less, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. Before I get into it, if you're new to my channel, thanks for stopping by. Here, we talk about minimalism and things of that nature, so if that sounds good to you and you end up liking the video, be sure to like and consider subscribing. Let's get started. And as always, I just share what I do and my reasons behind it, hoping that you get some value or inspiration out of these tips. I'm gonna go over 10 things that I do to live more frugally and why I do them. And the first thing is do activities that don't cost money. I used to have the mentality that I needed to spend money anytime that I wanted to leave the house and do something fun. And that's just not true, because there's actually a number of things that I do that don't cost anything. I don't need to go shopping or skydiving every time I leave the house to have fun. You guys are probably well aware by now that I like to play basketball and skate, and one can argue that I have to actually purchase a basketball to go out and play, but every single time after that, it's free. Aside from having to replace the basketball maybe every few years, it doesn't cost me anything every time I want to go do it. This is just one example. Going for a walk in the park, going to the beach, and reading doesn't cost me anything. And yes, reading doesn't cost me anything because a library card is free. And I definitely don't read as much as I'd like to, but I'm working on that. Once I realized that I didn't have to splurge every time I wanted to have fun, I sort of found more enjoyment out of these things because I never got buyer's remorse and they sort of filled up the time I may have otherwise spent spending. The next thing I do is I stopped buying one occasion clothing. And this wasn't something I was just guilty of, it was more of a routine for me. If I had a family event, a fancy anything, or a trip somewhere, it usually meant going out and buying something solely for that event. I would buy something that I knew I would only wear few and far between. And a perfect example is my trip to Iceland. Naturally, there was a $200 jacket that I really wanted before my trip. I knew I would have used it every single day I was there, but I opted to use my really old North Face jacket that I've been hanging on to. I'm sure this new expensive jacket would have lasted me a very long time, but it doesn't really make sense for someone in Florida to spend $200 on a jacket really would have only wore for 2 weeks, especially if you travel as little as I do. This is just my opinion. One of my favorite things minimalism has taught me is this idea of less decision making, and that directly applies to clothing for me. No more shirts that only make sense for one occasion, and no more sacrificing comfort for looks. If I don't see myself wearing something often, at least weekly, it doesn't have a spot in my wardrobe. The next thing I do is use a water bottle. And I know I just went on about this in my EDC video, but let me dive a little bit deeper into it. I don't want to routinely spend money on something I can pretty much get for free. The one-time purchase of a $10 water bottle has kept me from buying water every single day. Of course, I personally invested in a Brita, and yes, I have to replace the filter every once in a while, but such a small change can lead to a lot of money saved over a long period of time. Plus, I feel like it makes me drink more water, which is good, right? The next thing I do is keep a change jar. Another small addition to my frugal habits that's made a huge difference is having this little change jar. And I use this little mason jar until it's full, and then I'll upgrade to something bigger. I've been tossing loose coins into this jar for a year before I decided to finally cash it in. And I think I made about $400 from that. Whenever I use cash and I get change back, it goes right into this jar. It's almost zero effort to do this, and I literally have no other use for coins, even if I'm not quite sure what I'm saving for. The next thing I do is have a no spend day of the week. And this is something I only recently started doing. I'm definitely not the creator of this idea, so I'll just talk about how I utilize it. I'm gonna dedicate one day of every week to not spending a single dollar. So if that means I run out of gas, then I'll be walking. And if I run out of food, those crumbs that I find in my keyboard might start to look pretty good. I'm gonna try and make this on a day of the week that I work, because naturally it'll make it a little more difficult to go out and spend. The idea behind this is to stop those impulse, spontaneous purchases. And I think it'll bring me a much better sense of self-discipline, and it's further showing me that I don't have to spend money every time that I leave the house. The next thing is I look for the lowest price with the best review. A particular trait that I have is reading about 100 reviews before I buy something. I've just always sort of done this, and it usually works in my favor. Whenever I'm looking to purchase something, whether it's on Amazon or somewhere else, I'll look up reviews or videos on it. And it might seem a little extensive to do that, even if it's for a $40 desk chair, but I don't care. My previous desk chair cost a lot more than I'm willing to share with you, and the reviews were less than great, but I liked the way it looked, so I decided to go with it. And once I realized what a piece of garbage it was, I decided to sell it for a massive discount. And I was able to replace it with this current $40 Amazon chair. I read reviews, compared prices, and decided that it was worth it. I do this with everything, but my chair was just one example. Reading reviews and comparing prices has saved me a lot of headache and money over time. And the next thing I do is I stopped buying coffee. You've all heard this one before. While I'm all for the occasional treat of buying myself a coffee, it's become less of a routine thing for me. I'll spare you the details of how much a $5 coffee costs twice a week over the period of a few months. I make it at home now, and I bring it when I want to. I prefer this obviously because it's massively cheaper, but more importantly, it's consistent. Nothing can ruin my day faster than ordering something from Starbucks and it tasting completely different than the other Starbucks that I go to. The next thing I do is save my credit card reward points. I do use cash sometimes, but more often than not, I use my credit cards for purchases. And I do this very carefully. I have 2 credit cards, and which one I decide to use depends on where I am or what I'm buying. Each one earns a particular amount of points depending on the category. I won't go into specifics, but since both my credit cards are issued through my bank, I'm able to redeem my rewards right in my app, right into my savings. As long as I stay on top of it, I'm not accumulating debt, and my savings is growing slowly but steadily. The next thing I do is I sell unwanted things. And this is something I mentioned doing when I talk about decluttering. Most of my items that I decluttered were actually sold, especially the electronics. Sold to people that I know or sold on an app like OfferUp. This is a great way to get some of the money back that I spent on things, and in rare cases, all the money that I spent. I always recommend trying to sell things before tossing them or giving them away, because you might be surprised how fast some things sell when they're listed. Once I sold everything that I was ready to part with, it was more enjoyable to have that negative space rather than have to deal with these things that weren't even being used. And the last thing, and arguably the most important thing that I do, is be satisfied. And let me explain just what I mean here. It's not so much that I just tell myself to be more grateful. It's just that I learn to be happier with less. Because if I need to spend money to be content, then there's a bigger problem. It'll be a never-ending loop of spending. I've learned to be happy spending less, owning less, and doing less. I see negative space and free time as an asset, even if they're not physical things. I suppose I could change this point from being satisfied to being happy, because that's how I feel, at least right now. Minimalism has directly correlated with me living a more frugal life, but you don't necessarily need to be a minimalist to adopt some of these habits. I hope sharing some of these things that I do maybe inspired you to try a few of them out for yourself to see if they help you save another $1 or $2. Anyways, as always, I appreciate the time you spent here watching, and I hope you got some value or inspiration out of it. If you did like this video and you do like this type of content, be sure to like and consider subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you next time.